Hello, everybody. This is Tara Woodruff with your host, author Craig Satowski, and we are with Mentor Radio today, and we have an amazing guest. I'm super excited, Karen Hudes. If you don't know who she is, I put some information in that hangout there that hopefully you've done some research and Google is your friend, but right now we're going to get right to the juice of it, and Craig is going to start us off. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks for having me, Tara.
Yeah.
Welcome, guys. I just want to give a brief intro on Karen Hudes. Karen Hudes studied, it's Hudes, correct?
Yes, that's good.
Karen Hudes studied law at Yale Law School and economics at the University of Amsterdam. She worked in the U.S. Export-Import Bank of the U.S. from 1980 to 1985 and in the legal department of the World Bank from 1986 to 2007. She established a non-governmental organization committee of the International Law Section of the American Bar Association and the Committee on Multilateralism and the Accountability of International Organizations of the American Branch of the International Law Association. You could reach her out. You could check her out at kahudes.net. Karen, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me here, Craig.
I really appreciate you taking the time in your busy schedule, spending it with Tara and myself. Can you just give us a brief background of who you are?
Yes. People call me the World Bank whistleblower. I can describe myself in an I Love Lucy skit where she's trying to work the switchboard and getting all tangled up in the lines. I'm sitting right smack dab in the middle of the international financial system. That's where the Bretton Woods institutions are. Bretton Woods is the place where, in New Hampshire, it's a ski resort, where 44 countries gathered at the very end of World War II to create the International Monetary Fund, which is supposed to get the currencies to work together, and the World Bank, which is actually 5 different organizations. The first one that was created was the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and then there are a few others. The IBRD lends to the middle-income countries, and then there's the International Development Association that has subsidized interest rates. But the fact of the matter is the Bretton Woods institutions are in the middle of 188 member countries and trying to keep the world on track in finances. And it turns out that they've been taken over by a group that thought they were entitled to run the entire world. So it's been heavy sledding, actually.
Can you tell us how far back this goes?
Yes. Why don't you try Babylon?
I don't think a lot of people understand exactly how far back this goes and who's involved in it.
Well, I wasn't kidding when I said Babylon. The group that thinks they're entitled to dictate the world's entire economy is the Jesuits, and that's a group that was created in the 1500s around the time of the Reformation, which was when some countries felt that the Pope and Rome had no right to dictate what their religion was going to be. And actually it was in 1200. I said 1500, but it's actually in 1200, which is when the United Kingdom got into trouble with the then Pope. It was King John. And do you remember when the Magna Carta was signed? Well, it ended up that the Pope, King John, was afraid of getting excommunicated by the Pope, and he signed over all of the United Kingdom. And then when Rome started losing its stranglehold because of the Reformation, that's when the Jesuits were created. And so all of the turmoil that you see is basically, it's a dog and pony show that's been orchestrated by the Jesuits that think they're entitled to rule the world.
So how do you incorporate the Jesuits into the United States monetary system? A lot of people get stuck on that, and they really don't believe that it could actually be happening in the United States. Can you explain it?
Yes, I certainly can. First of all, there are what they call secret societies. That was what John F. Kennedy was talking about. I can give you a very short answer, and then in the other answers as we go along, I can show how the Jesuits are in control. But do you remember when John F. Kennedy was assassinated? that was because he had signed something called the Green Hilton, Hilton as in Hilton Hotel, the Green Hilton Memorandum, where he was going to have the United States issue its own currency instead of the currency which is now issued by the Federal Reserve notes. That's why we pay interest on our debt. We wouldn't have to. What John F. Kennedy had in mind was that there's a lot of gold, much more gold in the world than people know about. And he was going to use some of this gold to back the dollars issued by the Treasury. It was going to be honest money. And the bankers who are earning interest on our currency didn't like that. And it's the Jesuits that are earning the money on that. The money, when you pay your taxes, you issue a check that goes one place, and that's if you owe taxes, and your tax return goes somewhere else. Well, that check goes to something called the City of London, which that's because many people think that the colonies became independent from the United Kingdom. They actually never did. But so some of the money stays in the City of London, and the bulk of it goes to the Vatican. That's where our taxes go.
Yeah, it's coming from the IRS?
That's right. And what I was going to say is Gambino got out of jail very recently, and the very first thing he did was to say that it was somebody from the mafia who was in a sewer who fired a shot, the kill shot, that assassinated John F. Kennedy. And he said he was doing it on instructions from the Jesuits and the Vatican. So that, you know, that sort of gives you an overview. But I can tell you in excruciating detail from how Ronald Reagan recognized the Jesuits, although they had been banished after the murder of Lincoln, because Lincoln was also trying to have honest money. He had the greenbacks right at the, during the Civil War. He didn't want to pay the exorbitant interest that the bankers were going to charge to finance the Civil War. And the Vatican and the Jesuits were behind the Civil War and manipulating that to keep the United States from being strong.
So you mean to tell me the Revolutionary War, as well as the Civil War, it wasn't exactly what we learned about in history?
That's exactly what I'm saying. So remember when Benjamin Franklin went off to Paris and negotiated the Treaty of Paris? Well, since when, if you win the war, are you ending up paying reparations, which is what the Treaty of Paris was all about? And then remember when our capital was burned down in 1812? Again, the United States was trying to be independent from the United Kingdom, and they were having none of that. No, the lawyers have been very clever in disguising all of this. The Jesuits have been very, very clever in concealing what it is that they've been up to. So that's why people, when they hear about this, their first reaction is to be dismissive, because they cannot believe that something this big can have been kept secret for this long. But I can tell you it's true. A fair number of people have seen me now in the alternative media, but I was working very, very hard from the time that I was fired from the World Bank in 2007 until I started learning my way around the alternative media. It was 5 years, and the mainstream media is owned and controlled by the Jesuits, and they own the financial companies. People think that all the banks are separate. It turns out they're one big conglomerate, and this is easy actually to document because the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland, three mathematicians did a very good study and can show that all of the banks that people think are separate have the same exact directors that go from one board of directors to the other. So the banks are all interconnected. That's how come you had the LIBOR scandal. There's an incredible amount of insider trading. The Securities and Exchange Commission is completely bought out. What happened with Bernie Madoff was not one-off. And I had the Serious Fraud Office called up the Securities and Exchange Commission about the corruption that I was reporting at the World Bank, and the SEC simply stonewalled, which was a rude awakening to me. I had no idea that the state capture went that deep, but it does.
So let me ask you a question. I've heard a lot of conspiracy theories about whether or not the United States is a corporation, and I say that with a smile on my face because I know that you know the answer to this. How did they actually spin birth certificates into, I guess, would you say a collateral account, or we collateralized through our birth certificate? Can you
Yes.
explain? Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, I certainly can. And there's a very nice document that I received a couple of weeks ago from some researchers in Carolina. They went to their state capital and they looked at the old correspondence files. It was in 1873 when the second Constitution was created. This is, remember, after Lincoln was assassinated. I just saw another really good video about how the 13th Amendment was erased. It wasn't. It was ratified. It existed. That is an amendment which said that lawyers, members of the bar, and people who are working in the service of the crown are not to hold office in the United States. And the lawyers simply erased it. It wasn't appealed. They just pretended like it didn't exist. and what these people did in the video was they went back and they showed in all of the different books and the printing that yes, that amendment was there. It is an actual amendment that we've just stopped including in our Constitution for no good reason except that the lawyers didn't like it there.
Pretty convenient. Which Constitution are we talking about? The original one or the one that was implemented after the corporation was formed?
Yes, I'm talking about the one where the United States is incorporated, and in the District of Columbia, in that square mile, which is itself also incorporated.
I also hear a lot of conspiracy talk about the Vatican as well as the city of London included in the three city-states. Is there any truth to that?
Yes, and let's talk for a minute about this conspiracy theory.
I'd love to, Carol.
Yeah, a psychologist did a study of people who are supposedly conspiracy theorists and people who are not, and what they found out was that the people who were conspiracy theorists were actually closer in touch with reality. You can brand them as conspiracy theorists, but the fact of the matter is reality happens to have a lot of secrets in it. There is a secret society called the Knights of Malta. There is a secret society called the Masons, and they're acting in secret. And the fact of the matter is they're not secret anymore. People are learning about them and disclosing them. And so we ought to come up with a different name than conspiracy theorists. It should be reality theorists.
Realists.
Yes, realists. That's what we are.
Can you touch on the birth certificate issue and what exactly a birth certificate is?
Yes. Okay. When the Federal Reserve, remember, the Federal Reserve is charging us interest on our currency. What happens is the Treasury issues a note. It says, I owe you, and it gives that to the Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Reserve prints our money, okay, and issues it, and there's an interest payment. Now, what the we the citizens end up having to pay the debt to the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve, because the debt has gotten big, doesn't want to just say it's an unsecured loan. When you borrow money for your house, you want it secured, you want collateral. The Federal Reserve decided that they wanted collateral. What did they want as collateral? Well, the first thing they did was they took all of our national parks. They've been pledged to the Federal Reserve. We don't own the land anymore. And they said, we want the earnings of the citizens that are going to be paying taxes. By the way, taxes did not exist until the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. Then they also created the Internal Revenue Service. So what the Federal Reserve does when your child is born, when you were born, depending on your age, but chances are, you're not that old, the Social Security number is used as a bond. They issue a bond in your name because they figure you're going to pay a certain amount of taxes over your lifetime, and they're estimating what those taxes are going to be, and they then consider it the right thing to do to issue a bond to serve as collateral for your tax payments. And then that bond goes on the capital markets and earns money for the Federal Reserve. So they're earning money on your future tax payments. This is this is a pretty, what can I say? If you're a banker, it makes sense.
But if I say I'm a good American, would I want them to do that?
Absolutely not. And let me tell you one other thing. When you go to court, when you see the court is treating you, when you go into court, they're not looking at you as if you're a human being and a person. They're looking at you as if you're the person whose bond has been traded on the capital markets. They're looking at you as if you're a financial instrument, which is crazy. And when you get married, if you're married in front of a justice of the peace, he is marrying the two, they're called sureties, the entity that has issued, whose name has been put on those bonds. That's who's getting married. This sounds like I'm making it up, but unfortunately I'm not. It's just a travesty.
What do we do, Karen? I mean, from this, I've seen that you've been involved in a lot of lawsuits, and I commend you for all the stuff that you've been doing. Where are we right now? Can you just explain exactly? Because I'm of the old school that the derivative market is going to knock us back to the Stone Ages, and I want to know about the metals fraud. I want to know about suppression. I want to know about it all, and it seems like you're the person to talk to about it. Can you just give us a little bit about how we can claim our certificates, if that's possible?
Yes, I can tell you where we are as citizens, and I can tell you where we are in terms of the international financial system, because don't forget, I'm a lawyer who worked with all of the countries in the World Bank. And I didn't realize when I started doing my job as the lawyer inside the World Bank what this was all going to lead to. I found out the hard way, through trial and error, after I got fired illegally, because the World Bank issues bonds on the capital markets. And when I was fired, and then I was barred from going back in the World Bank, because I was dealing with the representatives of the countries on the board. And I told them that they were not doing their job, that they were supposed to end the cover-up of corruption that I started reporting. And so people will understand there's something very concrete that we can do. It's not like you say, oh, there's nothing to be done, let's just accept things for the way they are because there's nothing that can be done. There's nothing further from the truth. As far as in the United States, we have something called Article 5 of the Constitution, which says that when 2/3 of the states' legislatures have asked for a constitutional convention, we're entitled to one. 42 states legislatures have asked for an Article 5 constitutional convention, and we are now dealing with the U.S. Congress and we're telling them that they're derelict in their duties. They have given an oath of office to faithfully execute their duties, and they're not doing that. So we as citizens are in a very good situation. We can take back our country because the Constitution, the real Constitution, says that it is by the consent of the governed, and we've taken back our consent, and we are now going to fix the situation. So we're doing very well as far as that goes. And as far as how are we doing under the Bretton Woods institutions, we're in great shape there as well. And the reason that we're in great shape is because we're all pulling together. There is an enormous coalition that is aware of all of this corruption. I've been writing to all of these people, and they have been working behind the scenes to do what they could. And they've done quite a bit. So, for example, the U.S. Congress, yes, they've done all kinds of terrible things, but they also realized what was at stake. And so when they gave money to the World Bank, they put a very important rider on there. They said that the money was not going to be dispersed until the effects of retaliation against whistleblowers had been eliminated. So this means that the World Bank, as far as the Congress is concerned, is out of compliance. And I've also been in touch, I'm writing all kinds of letters. Let me tell you about the last letter that I wrote because there's a political scientist named Jacek Kugler who came to the World Bank in 2004. He had been working with the Department of Defense on a very accurate, it's called a power transition model, that was predicting that there was a way to avoid World War III. And he came to the World Bank because I guess the Department of Defense was, you know, it's military, and he needed civilians to be involved in this model. So he came to the World Bank, and I didn't realize that we were talking about world corruption. I thought we were talking about corruption at the World Bank, and it was my job as the World Bank's lawyer to tackle that. And I had been also on a human resources committee. When the board gave money to the World Bank, they also put a rider on there. They said, we want the human resources department to be cleaned up so that good managers are promoted and bad managers are fired. And so when that exercise derailed and all of the dishonest managers started getting promoted, I realized that we had a problem. And so I started writing to the board and dealing with the board on that. When that didn't work, I went to the Treasury Department, and I went armed with a very, very, you know, a strong letter, which you can read on my website. What I said to the Treasury Department was that we were going to lose, the United States was going to lose its ability to single-handedly appoint the president of the World Bank. That was called the Gentleman's Agreement. It was in effect for 66 years, and this power transition model was saying that we were no longer going to, the rest of the countries were not going to allow us to do that because we were not exercising the job of president in the interest of all the others. I mean, think of a farmer's cooperative where the biggest farmer is hogging the irrigation equipment. That cooperative isn't going to last very long. So, and true to form, when I made that warning, I ended up getting fired in retaliation, but not before Senator Lugar wrote 3 letters to the World Bank and said, don't fire this lady. And so then, after I was fired, the U.S. Government Accountability Office was 3 senators, Lugar, Leahy, and Bai, asked for the GAO to look into the corruption at the World Bank that I had been reporting. And the World Bank stonewalled the GAO study. So that's when the World Bank asked for the appropriation from the U.S. Congress, and Congress said no, not until the effect of retaliation against whistleblowers has been eliminated. So this is, you know, this is about as good as it's going to get. We have a cover-up of corruption that's got to be uncovered, and we have the muscles. The World Bank issues bonds in the capital markets, not just in the United States, but also all of these states. So I went to the states' attorneys general. I went to the states' governors. I said they were also responsible for cleaning up the mess. So I've involved the counties because the president of the Association of County Executives, American Association of County Executives, that's Ike Leggett. He's in Montgomery County, Maryland. He's my county executive. So we've got all the counties that are also working to clean up this corruption. They understand that we have got to pull together, and we are, and we're also pulling together with our allies. Germany, you know, Germany asked to get its gold back because first they asked for an audit. The Federal Reserve would not go along with the audit, so Germany asked for its gold back. And then the Federal Reserve said, you'll get it in 7 years. That's an act of war. Now, in the meantime, this power transition model was predicting that we were going to lose our alliance with Europe and Germany, which you can't have. So General Dempsey, I've been writing to the Department of Defense ever since Secretary of Defense, good heavens, I'm blocking on his name. He used to be the senator for Nebraska, and in 2008, I asked him, I said, what are you planning on doing about this corruption? And so when he became Secretary of Defense, I asked him, and I went to the people in the Department of Defense that were doing the model, and I asked them, what are you going to do? We're going to lose all of our allies. And they said, well, we're not going to be your go-between with the Secretary of Defense. What we want you to do is to get in touch with other departments. So I've been writing to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, and he had a town hall meeting, And I asked him what he was planning on doing if the dollar crashed, because that's where the Federal Reserve note is headed. When they issue all of these dollars, like there's no tomorrow, with something they call quantitative easing, that makes absolutely no sense. This is going to crash the dollar, and in the meantime, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are not using dollars in their international trade. That's 25% of international trade, and we've got a problem with our credit rating. There's three main credit rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, and now there's a fourth one, Universal Credit Rating Group, and that is owned by the Russians and Chinese, and they're about to really lower the U.S. credit rating. China has already done so.
Okay, let me interrupt you real quick. When you talk about the credit agencies, aren't these the same guys that pretty much gave great ratings to all the bonds and securities on Wall Street?
That's right, and we're not going to be relying on them. We're going to have a fourth credit rating agency. But in the meantime, you know, Standard & Poor did lower the credit rating, and Eric Holder sued them just at the point that they lowered the credit rating. And the lawyer who's been defending Standard & Poor said that it was Eric Holder was trying to get Standard & Poor intimidated and not lower the credit rating.
Is that the same Eric Holder from the Fast and Furious?
Yes, and that's the guy who tried to throw me in jail for trespassing after I was reinstated by 188 ministers of finance. Because after I bought the World Bank bond, you know, and there was another scandal, actually. Do you remember when Eliot Spitzer was fired as the governor of New York for going to the New York Madam?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, the board was firing Paul Wolfowitz around the same time because he gave a huge pay raise to his girlfriend. And when that happened, all of the executive directors who had been patronizing that same business establishment were warned that that information was going to be made public. Well, they went ahead.
Wait, Karen, I have to interrupt you. What kind of establishment was that?
The New York Madam. And some of the...
Okay.
I found this out because I speak Dutch. I studied economics in Holland, and I happened to be in Holland, and the man who was representing the Dutch government, Herman Wijfels, he talked about this in the newspaper in Dutch, and since I read Dutch, you know, and then the next day, his predecessor, Ad Melkert, was asked in a television program whether he was also being blackmailed, and Ad said, well, I'm a boring guy, but there are a lot of people on the board that don't take very kindly to this, you know, threat, and they went ahead and fired Paul Wolfowitz anyway. Well, I took this, and I went to the dean of Yale Law School. I said, how is it possible that we think we're entitled to blackmail all the country's ambassadors? And I also went to the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. I had been in touch with them already, and they told me to get in touch with Kenneth Peel in the Treasury Department, which I did. I've been to the Senate Committee on Intelligence. Don't forget, this is exactly what's going on now when Germany does not want to share intelligence information with the United States. They say it's because we're blackmailing their senior politicians. This is not going over well. The United States cannot be isolated like this. So this is how you see that there is actual progress towards rule of law. The United States is, and the group that's behind all of this is not being, they're just not getting away with it. They tried to get World War III going in Syria, and the UK Parliament said no, we're not going to support that war, and it didn't happen in the United States either. So the Jesuits are not, they're very much exposed right now, and their game doesn't work when they're exposed, and they're exposed.
Let me interrupt you real quick, because you're talking about things that are happening around the world with these certain people. Do you know anything about what was going on in South Carolina? And if you do, can you briefly explain why all of these generals are getting fired over poker chips?
Yes. What happened was there was going to be a false flag. There was a missing nuclear device, and it was supposed to be detonated over Charleston. And instead, it went off 600 miles off the coast of Charleston. This was the 8th of October. that this happened. And
what year is that, Karen?
This year, this October. And there's an earthquake seismograph center, and they looked at the shocks from that detonation. It was not an earthquake. Earthquakes have different characteristics. It was a nuclear device that went off there, and the heroes that prevented that device from going off in Charleston were fired, along with other senior brass in the military. And
so it wasn't about poker chips?
No, it was not about poker chips. And the fact of the matter is, you know, the poker chips incident happened 6 months earlier. Why did they wait for him to rescue Charleston before they fired him over the poker chips?
I don't mean to be laughing, but this is just batshit crazy stuff. I mean, it drives me crazy that people actually believe the mainstream media. And, you know, we have a guest like yourself, and there's a lot of people that are going to start laughing over this, and they don't realize how serious that we are. But,
Craig, people do not believe the mainstream media. I think it's got an approval rating now of not even 30%. That's why we didn't have the war in Syria. And if you go on my website, you know, what you see at the top of the page is the various groups that I thought were important. And I didn't realize in the beginning just how bad the media is. They're owned by the group that owns the Federal Reserve. And so you'll see my letters to them. I wrote to all of the newspaper editors, the Association of Newspaper Editors, asking them, why aren't they telling people what's going on? Well, they weren't going to write back and say it's because we're all corrupted by the same group that bought you the Federal Reserve. But you can see in the letter I'm writing them, I said, how on earth are you going to explain to the American people your failure to tell them about something they're entitled to know? And so we have perfectly documented the fact that this country, how can you have a republic when people are not being given the information that they're entitled to? And when there was the presidential election, I asked CBS to, you know, for the presidential debates, to ask about a question about international corruption. And CBS knew very well what was going on because Cameron had been there on a show the month before and was raked over the coals. So CBS was just the group that's in charge of the presidential debates. It used to be the League of Women Voters, but they kicked them out because it was a real presidential debate, and what they wanted was theater. So what you're seeing on the news is just theater. It has nothing to do with what you really need to know. You shouldn't be watching it.
So you come from the school of throwing your TV out?
Yes, as a matter of fact. Yes.
Karen, let's veer into something that I'm passionate about. Do you know anything about chemtrails?
Yes.
Can you please explain to people, because I've been getting sprayed all day today, and I try to tell people to look up in the skies as often as they possibly can. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on what chemtrails are and who might be providing these lovely sprays daily?
Yes, as a matter of fact, what I think we should do is I'll forward you the YouTube video that I got from a whistleblower in Poland who's working for a company that's supposedly providing food for the airlines. No, they're the ones that are doing the logistics for the chemtrails. And who's behind it? It's the people we've been talking about. It's the Jesuits. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to change the characteristic of the atmosphere. And the reason they're doing this, I'll tell you, I wasn't sure what it was, why they're trying to make us sick. It's because we have capabilities as human beings which are being affected by all of this garbage that they're putting in our atmosphere. We have abilities that are being impacted. That's what it is.
So you mean to tell me like they're trying to fry out our pineal gland?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Very interesting. Really is very interesting. Can you tell us, let's go in a different direction. Can you explain to us the scandal with LIBOR and why that actually affects people?
Yes. What I was saying about all of the banks being interconnected and all of the commodities, they're being fixed by this group that, that owns 40% of the assets of the 43,000 companies that are traded on the capital markets and 60% of their annual earnings. So because you have the same directors on the boards of all of these banks, they're able to come up with a different rate for LIBOR than they're supposed to under the formulas. So they're just, the markets are just rigged. Everything is rigged. There's an article in Rolling Stone called "Everything is Rigged," and that's true. Everything is rigged. That's what it is. It's this one group that thinks they're entitled to run the world, and it thinks they're entitled to just set whatever prices they want to set. Price gouging. That's ridiculous. They're not entitled to do that.
So if people were asking you, like right now, if the stock market was going up, should I invest in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, or should I get into like precious metals, like gold, silver, and other commodities, not electronic notes or funds, but the actual physical commodity? What would you say to them?
I would say that's exactly right. I wasn't really understanding for a while what was at stake, and I went into something called an ETF, that's exchange traded fund, where you've got the stock, you don't have the actual precious metal, and that's useless, because what you have in the capital markets right now is you have something called naked shorts, which is people are promising to deliver gold, which they absolutely don't have. Those contracts are not going to be honored. It's a scam. It's a scam. And the reason that the value is going up in the capital markets is because they're pumping in all these dollars, but the dollars are not going to stay up. They're going to go where every paper currency goes. And the thing is, I'm hoping that we can get this this problem that we have corrected before we have something called permanent gold backwardation, which is when people who own gold refuse to sell it for paper dollars because the paper dollars are worthless. I was working on Argentina in the 1980s and the early 90s, which is when their currency just completely became valueless. And you go to the store with, you know, wads of bills. It was the same thing in Nigeria when I was working on Nigeria. And you have to stand there and just, the prices change every day because paper is really not worth anything.
Interesting. I get, you know, sometimes I think I'm a smart guy, and I just get confused with all of this stuff because there's so much fraud and corruption everywhere we turn. Do you know what the plunge protection team is and what they're involved in?
Yes, I found out about them. This is, it's 4 people, and they're part of something that's also called the National Advisory Council on International Monetary and Financial Policies. That's the group that oversees the World Bank. It's chaired by the Secretary of the Treasury. It's got the Chairman of the Federal Reserve on it. In the case of the plunge protection team, I have, there's a really nice article from Rents. They've also got the SEC on it, and the Commodities Future Trading Association. And what this group does is they're supposed to look at the derivatives market. Derivatives, that's just, you know, they like to come up with words that intimidate people. It's just an insurance policy. You're betting on whether an event is going to happen, whether the stock is going to go up, whether the price of something is going to go up, and these, they're a contract also. So these contracts are worth a lot of money, and the bankers, it's like gambling. They're gambling whether a price is going to go up or down and issuing bets on that. And so if they themselves are crooked, which is what they were doing in the housing market, they can have a derivative betting against the corruption that they know about. They knew that those the price of those bundled mortgage collateralized securities were going to go down, and they issued derivatives and bet against the price. And of course, they made a lot of money. There were derivatives for the World Trade Center before that thing blew up. They knew it was going to blow up. So they bought insurance on it. I mean, that's what this group is. They're sitting there enriching themselves. It's part and parcel of this corruption we're talking about. That's what they are. They're the bandits.
I'm sorry. Have you ever heard the term economic hitmen?
Yes. There's a guy named Perkins who worked for a company and wrote a book about economic hitmen. These are people that go into developing countries and try to get the countries to borrow a lot of money and go into debt, and then, of course, the debt gets called and the countries are harmed. But, you know, I can tell you that he never worked at the World Bank. He worked for a company that was a contractor for the World Bank. I have a lot of people that say, you know, what is it you think you're doing? The World Bank is absolutely so completely infested and corrupt that there's no way you could do anything constructive. I'm sorry, let me just kill this. So I should have turned that off. Anyway, so the idea of being an economic hitman is that you're a person who is going to exercise your economic strength to harm the countries instead of help them. But at the World Bank, it's an organization that has a treaty, and it's also the organization that I am using as a turnaround, as a mechanism, as a platform, so that we can try to turn the Titanic before it hits the iceberg. We absolutely need an institution to build from, and the idea is not to use the World Bank as a platform to dominate the world or to control the world, but simply if you're going to require transparency, you have to have a place where you're insisting that there is transparency. You have to have a place to bring all of the countries to negotiate so that you can agree how you're going to go forward and do things differently. That's what it is. It's an institution for the benefit of humanity. And if we inform people, enough people, that they want to make use of this machinery, it's like somebody has hijacked a bus. Do you blame the bus for going the wrong way down the street? No. You turn the bus around and go the right way. And the question I've asked the other World Bank whistleblowers, whether they think if we all go back together that we can turn that place around. And we think we can. But the most important thing is that if you have whistleblowers and you hear from them, and other whistleblowers who complain about the first whistleblowers, if those guys get co-opted, if you're hearing from whistleblowers regularly and nothing bad is happening to them, human beings are a feisty bunch. We really are. And what you need to know as the public is whether the news is bringing you the information from the whistleblowers and whether the whistleblowers are getting through and how they're doing. And really, I think we are turning things around. As I told you, this power transition model, it's 90 to 95% accurate, and it started predicting once Elaine Colville and I got our statements up on the UK Parliament that we were going to have rule of law in the world, and I think that's where we're headed. That's what I've seen.
So are you just utilizing the laws and rules and regulations that these guys have created against them?
Yes, that's a good way to put it. But it's not that these guys have created. I mean, not all laws are bad. I mean, and not all lawyers are bad. I think one of the things that you need to do is, as a consumer of the laws, you have to see which laws make sense to you and what the provisions are in the laws. And the provisions that I'm using are the ones requiring accurate financial information.
So I have some people that are interested in gaining a lloydal title in the United States on some properties. Is that something that you would recommend with the Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act, where they could pretty much come in and take everything that you have anyway? Do you know anything about alloidal title?
Well, what I've looked at, unfortunately,
sorry, that question just crept up.
No, it looks as if alloidal title. What that means is that you have the actual right to that land. You're the one who owns it. You're the ultimate owner. That's what that means. And it looks to me as if the entity with the alloidal title to our land is not anybody in the United States. It's the Jesuits. They're the ones with the alloidal title to our land. So we're not going to get it that way. They're not going to get it, not unless they can convince the Black Pope to sell it to them.
Can you touch on the Black Pope?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to.
That might be.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, if you hold on half a second, I can give you his name. I don't know it by heart, but I wrote him a letter. Yeah, he's the Secretary General of the Jesuits. Let's see. Here we go. I wrote a letter to the Deputy Chief of Staff of Harry Reid. I had written him in 2008, and so I wrote him another one. It's Adolfo Nicholas. That's who it is. Yeah. And yeah.
What is his job exactly?
His job, well, first of all, he's fired. He's fired. We don't need him, and we don't want him. But his job is to control the world, and he's got his army of Jesuits. And the Jesuits' theme song is "We can do anything. The end justifies the means," and they really do anything. They're a nasty bunch. They're a very nasty bunch. And
isn't there a Jesuit Pope right now?
Well, he's not the one who's got the army of these Jesuits backing him. So yeah, and when he was in Argentina, he helped get rid of some of the people during. There was a time that I think 35,000 people disappeared. So he's not he's making all the right noises, but he's not he's not anybody that we should be happy about either.
All right, let me ask you a question. You were talking about treaties, rules, and regulations. Do you have any indigenous treaties that you'd like to talk about?
There's one that I just learned about. I didn't know about it. There's a group called the Moors. And
where are they from?
Well, they were in Morocco, and they had some pretty powerful treaties. They were the first country that had a treaty with the United States after the Revolutionary War. And this group actually is taking credit for bringing humanity through the Dark Ages. They were the ones that had the Arabs in Spain. They were the ones that had all the knowledge. That was how we got out of the Dark Ages. It was through them. They had kept the light of human information burning. And of course, there are a lot of other indigenous groups too. But that was the one that I just learned about. I was excited to learn about them.
Very interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it's very interesting. I think Tara has a couple questions for you. I see her biting at the bit in the back there.
I had myself muted so I wouldn't have all the distractions back here. Wow, I'm learning. Well, I thought I was smart about an hour ago. This is very interesting. Thank you so much for being so honest and open about this, and from watching the videos and looking at your website, I had this feeling of hope coming out of you. And during this interview, I'm seeing an incredible amount of optimism. The average everyday Joe doesn't feel like that. What would you suggest the average everyday Joe wrap in their mind to help them understand the real truth of the matter and to have that kind of optimism that you do?
All the average Joe has to do is look at The Wizard of Oz and look at Toto pulling the curtain back. And by the way, Frank Baum, when he wrote The Wizard of Oz, he had the international financial system in mind. He was writing this for adults. And this terrible corruption can only exist when it's secret, and it's not secret anymore. It's really not secret, and it explains a lot. I got an email that I have to answer later in the day. Somebody who's working for the Jesuits was trying to figure out a way to make it seem like what I was saying didn't make any sense. And they were doing hand flips and back flips, and it just wasn't working. No, especially when Gambino is saying it was the Jesuits that killed JFK. And you see what it was that he was doing with currency. We simply have to do that. We'll get honest currency. There's no doubt in my mind that we will. I mean, we're all pulling together. The whole world is pulling together. Why would we want all of our tax dollars to go to the Jesuits? Of course we don't. How are they going to continue to pull this off when we know what it is they're up to? Well, they're not. Their game is up. So that's the reason for the optimism. But the fact of the matter is, Joe Sixpack can't just go back and leave it all up to us. He's got to help us. He's got to let people know that, yeah, he knows what's up. But it's once people start working all together, it's really, I mean, it's amazing the stuff people are doing. And I kind of feel sorry for the Black Pope. Think about it. Everybody's waiting for him to give orders. Nobody's going to do anything of their own initiative. And so he's got the entire humanity to try to deal with. He's not going to make it, is he? No, he's not.
That's very good. How about now I want to kind of go back to the political thing. The military-industrial complex, is that straight up owned by the Jesuits?
Well, a lot of the companies that are, manufacturing this stuff is, and let's concentrate for a minute on Fukushima, yeah, which we know how to keep that from sickening the entire planet. Why is it that we're not doing that? Well, why is it that we have a nuclear energy industry that uses enriched uranium when there are other ways, if you want nuclear energy, that don't have those terrible byproducts with these half-lives of 35,000 years? Right. We don't have to have that. So all we have to do is, I mean, there's all kinds of technology that we have that we're not benefiting from. So we just have to stop the stranglehold. So this is kind of a long-winded answer to your question. Absolutely. These people are trying to prevent humanity from taking advantage of our ingenuity. And they're succeeding. Why are we letting them? We shouldn't.
Right. I'm a big proponent of entrepreneurialism, of people realizing there's 3 ways to file taxes and to pick one that's going to benefit them, and stop giving so much money up to these institutions and black popes that live in lands we've never been to. Is that something that you would suggest as well, that people start to look at 1099 and incorporating themselves? Or?
Well, I keep getting asked that question, and I'll tell you where I come out on it. If you're a person whose house is about to be repossessed, then I think, yes, you might try to use some of that ingenuity. But otherwise, I think if we all together work on the problem, we're likely to lick it. And you're taking risks when you try to do it the other way. And I don't think it's comfortable to do it that way. So, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. Also, there's no one approach. People write me and they say, is there a guaranteed way? And the answer is no, there's no guaranteed way. There are different approaches, and I think it's a bit dicey. I wouldn't do it unless I absolutely had to. Okay. When you have nothing to lose.
Okay. That's interesting. That's a really interesting answer. Okay. Let me see. I've been taking notes the whole time. I really love that the Moors. I mean, I thought I understood about the Moors.
It turns out that the Masons know about the Moors.
I'm sure they do. The thing that they were the first peoples that had a treaty with the United States after the Revolution, nobody knows that. That's never talked about. That's just crazy.
They do now.
They certainly do. If we got anything to do with it. Let me see here. Now, when we were talking about the economic hitmen and Perkins, and he definitely talks about that he worked for a company out of Boston, I believe it was. And what he explains is if the negotiation didn't go in favor of his bosses, which were outsourced by the World Bank, that they would literally send in the CIA and do a coup, set up a coup. And I see that happening a lot, and even now in modern Perkins media presses, he's not so anti-New World Order as he was initially. So I wonder, how deep do you think the CIA goes in creating and setting up and breaking down, governments like in Ecuador with the Banana Republic and how they shut that whole thing down? And I'd like your opinion on that.
Well, the CIA, it turns out, and all the intelligence agencies all report back to the Jesuits. That's what they were set up to do. So they're not working for the benefit of the United States or U.S. security. They're working for the benefit of the Vatican. Yeah. And I don't know what, I can't see that last thing. But for example, if you're looking at the Army and you're trying to figure out whether there's a difference in the approach of the U.S. soldiers or the mercenaries. Perkins was a mercenary for the World Bank, is what he was.
Right.
He was not a staff member.
Right.
So he was just like a hired contractor?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Would you suggest, right now, according to the No Child Left Behind Act in the United States, it gives the right to all military factions to come and actively recruit all the way down the line, no matter what age, to start bringing in the indoctrination of becoming soldiers. Would you highly suggest, or would you say it really doesn't matter, that parents kind of let their children know what it is, and that it is a sales pitch and not necessarily what they should be doing straight out of school? Because what I see in the military today is disenfranchised sections of people signing right up thinking they're going to be somebody and do something that's right for the world. And when in fact it turns out that they're going and knocking down doors of people just like us for oil and for money and for...
Well, I think the military is now asserting itself. I think we're let's put it this way: if they're not asserting themselves, we are in a lot of trouble. But everything that I see is pointing not only to the fact that the military is defending our country against the interests of these Jesuits that have nothing to do with patriotism, but the armies and defense of the Chinese and the Russians are working together with our defense to make sure that we all don't end up inadvertently in World War III. Right. That's what was in the playbook for the Jesuits. They wanted the world in World War III so they could make a lot of money on the armaments. But I could talk for a long time about the education system, which has been hijacked by this group that didn't want kids to learn how to think. No. So we've got a lot of retrofitting to do.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Can I interject real quick?
Yes, please.
Karen, can you explain the difference between commerce and economics and the reason why they're not teaching commerce or financial literacy in schools?
Well, economics is supposedly a science, and commerce is supposedly the nitty-gritty of how the markets work. But actually, let me talk for a minute about social science, which is politics and law and sociology and all of that stuff. It turns out it's really interconnected, and what they're doing with the disciplines is they're making silos out of them, so that, and what the universities are teaching, if a professor is not politically correct, they know what they need to do to stay and get tenure. There is a lot of the universities are not really there unattached. There is an agenda in each of these disciplines. I know that wasn't your question, but we're being preached to. Our entire definition of reality is something which people are trying to influence with all this media. There's propaganda from sun up to sundown. We don't even own reality, and that's it's a sorry thing.
Interesting. So I really don't have anything to do with what I'm thinking about. It's being influenced 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
In ways that we don't even dream of. That you'll be watching something, and then all of a sudden there's a subliminal picture of something else. They know humanity. Oh, and something that I also just learned, that people are being misused this way. It turns out that human beings are hardwired to believe in a benevolent universe and a benevolent God. Mm-hmm. And so that approach is being manipulated so that we're kept uncritical of people who are not, they're anything but benevolent. They're trying to hijack our sense of trust and loyalty and belief in a higher being to prevent us from seeing their criminality. It's not working, by the way. We figured that out.
Yes, we have.
There's a lot of people waking up to this, that's for sure. More than not.
Go ahead, Tara. The chickens just woke me up.
They're standing on the thing looking in the window at me, wondering what I'm doing. It's the funniest thing. Let me see. What's my next question? I guess, like I said before we went live, what made you, as a person growing up, decide that you wanted to be a lawyer and go to Yale, and then from there?
That is a good question. I'm idealistic, and so I usually, when I see something that looks good, I tend to think it is good. Mm-hmm. And so the legal profession, there was a friend of mine whose mother was a lawyer, and it looked good, and I thought, yeah, let me try that out. And then when I found out what the actual role of the lawyers has been, I was just flummoxed. And I've been holding them to account. I've been writing them. The legal profession is not going to be the same. It's not going to recover very easily because so many of them have been writing gobbledygook to trip everybody up and pull the wool over their eyes. It's been there to make it difficult to figure out what was really going on. But so one of the things I think that that's been really important is the fact that my father was a small businessman. He owned a grocery store, mm-hmm. and I used to go to his grocery store with him. And so I sort of felt like I was entitled to be out in the world. It was my place to be out in the world. And the other thing is that I had a Hungarian fencing coach. And so a lot of the stuff that started happening, I had this drilled into me that it's not a bad thing when you're under attack. As a matter of fact, that's your chance to parry riposte. That means you take the blade that's coming at you and you knock it aside, and then you get a clear view of the target. Whenever anybody's attacking you, that's when they're vulnerable. So I have just been in, a huge fencing match, which I like.
I love that. That is I hope you all are listening to that, because a lot of people, they get overwhelmed by the attack, and how you just described it, it opens up the door.
That's what
People,
you want.
I really believe that people should do things more like that. That they should be more involved in the martial art, whether it's fencing or like Craig is involved with martial arts. That aggressive approach puts you in a vulnerable position. Being able to move the blade away and get to work. It's in the adversity that we come out. That's to not be so afraid of the confrontation.
But what you have with all of the whistleblowers working together is we see the system exactly the way it is. We know what needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And the fact that we've had this issue, you know, all of us have had different issues in different places, but that gives us a panorama. And so we have a very good shared strategy. And if somebody had just, you know, gone to somebody who felt like they wanted to do good, but they didn't understand how the system worked, they would get it wrong. So yeah, you really do need to be engaged in the struggle for something better. And the fact is, once we win, that's when it's going to be really, really hard, because we're going to have to stay engaged, and we're going to have to really prevent ourselves from getting off track.
Absolutely. The reconstruction is going to be, it'll be a challenging time, no doubt about that.
But it'll be great, won't it?
It will indeed.
I can taste it, actually.
Yes, I can too. I can taste it. I can see it in your smile. It's just amazing. I'm really excited. Do you have anything else, Craig? Because I do not in my brain right now.
I have a couple questions. I'm a little bit of a cynic, I guess, just because of my life experience and the stuff that we had talked about the other day on the phone. Do you see life getting a little bit harder before it gets better?
I have a lot of people asking me that exact question, and they're also critical of me because they say I'm misleading people. People are just they're not going to be ready to get through the hard parts. And I have no way of knowing how difficult it's going to be, but I do know that this power transition model has told us that there is an existing coalition, and that coalition is stronger than the opposition. So I think it actually all depends on our ability. Nothing's cast in stone at this point. It's very fluid, and I think it all depends really on how able we are to work together to solidify this coalition. It's a very loose coalition, and it's vulnerable. Seriously, we do have to take the opponent very, very seriously, and we have to do really. We have to learn how to work together. I just had this email that got me very, very upset. They were trashing the Muslims, and and said, and the Muslims are killing the Christians. And I said, this is just a distraction. We have got to learn how to work together. We absolutely do, or we're not going to make it. And that's true. I'm not whitewashing anything. I'm not sitting here denying any of the terrible things that have happened. It's just that I'm saying we've got to have a strategy for doing it differently. And divide and conquer has worked beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Works beautiful every day. I'm glad you brought that up because I want people to realize we're not attacking anybody's faith. I always get a little sick chuckle whenever I hear somebody blame the monetary system on Jewish people. And I know the difference between Jews and Christians and Muslims, and I know the difference between Zionism. And I believe the Jewish people are just as screwed as everybody else. I'm talking about the everyday guy that's opening and closing his shop. I'm not talking about the Zionist model. Can you elaborate on that, or do you agree or disagree?
Well, I can answer that with a very graphic answer, and that is, it turns out that there's a nuclear bunker in Israel. And once the people in Israel realized that that bunker is just for the elite, they were planning on throwing everybody else in that country under a bus. I mean, they're going to have to come to grips with that.
So the everyday person is not going to be saved by the powers that be?
That's exactly right. And so that's how it shakes out.
That's why if something like that does go down, we need to cement the openings. Cement the openings. I have a quick question before you ask
Mexico. I got one foot out the door already.
I
have a really quick question. Jesuits and Christians, what's the difference? It's like,
well, I can give you a perfect answer. I'll show you the 4 pages of websites that a Christian sent to me, a Catholic, of the people that are fighting the Jesuits. They know exactly what they are. They're wearing these religious frocks, but they're not religious. No. They're anything but.
All right.
Well, I think we're almost done. Tara, do you have any more?
That's the last one that came in my brains.
Karen, I have to ask. I have a different philosophy on life than most people. I think we're light seeking the human experience. And I was wondering, when your light goes out, how would you like to be remembered?
Who says my light's going out?
Aha!
That's the best answer I've had. That is the best answer I've ever had. Well, listen, Karen, I really love and respect you, and I'm glad you came on our show. Can you give yourself a plug? Show people where you can get in touch with you?
Yes, and I've got a contact page too, so if you write me an email, I'll try to answer you. It's KAHUD as in David, ES.net. That's my website. Awesome. And sometimes it gets taken down, but I usually get it back up in a day or so.
And why does it get taken down, Karen?
I can't imagine.
Oh, man, thank you so much for everything that you do.
It's great.
I very much appreciate it.
Thanks again, Karen. Tara, I'll talk to you later.
Okay, hon. Thank you so much, Karen. Awesome.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.